In regard to like the Civil War stuff, though, I think it's actually, I'm extremely optimistic because I think it's a good thing that one of the top issues that we care about and have to deal with in our country is abortion instead of hunger or crazy inflation or actual, I mean, it's, I hate using the word privilege, but it's a relatively privileged position to have this, the top issue you care about. And to make a joke from earlier, maybe we might need to not blame those Russians for the war crimes in Ukraine because they were propagandized so heavily by the Russians to denazify. There's an interesting question.
So, there's an interesting question here.
I reject the premise, by the way.
So obviously, but this is the wars that we're involved in now. I know people who fought in those wars. They were propagandized as young men to believe that going to the Middle East and quote unquote fighting for our freedom was the right thing to do. They ended up doing things over there that they very much regret, but I would not charge them with murder.
Sure, I think it
would you because you scoff at this idea that being propagandized means that you shouldn't be held accountable.
There's a difference between trying to liberate the Iraqi people and then the war crimes also committed by certain soldiers on the ground. So if you're on the ground and massacring people, even if you are a U.S. soldier, you should be penalized because that's not what our army teaches you.
I would agree,
and we do, by the way. And also the thing is, but with the Iraq War, we have the benefit of it ending poorly, and that's why we get to look back at it so poorly. But you know, if we were able to set up, the problem with Iraq is that we weren't able to set up a democracy there after. So there's a lot.
But I didn't ask about war. I didn't ask about things that our nation would consider war crimes and that our country is against in terms of its policy. I'm talking about the United States being involved in illegitimate wars where people died.
I would say they're legitimate. I wouldn't call them illegitimate.
You wouldn't call them illegitimate, even though Congress didn't declare them.
Well, the Congress hasn't declared a war since World War II. Am I calling every war since World War II illegitimate? No.
Well, why not? They didn't go through the proper legal process.
Well, we don't do a lot of things by the Constitution. The Congress is the first thing that's mentioned in our Constitution, but, you know, they barely have actual power. And as much as I'd like to be a constitutionalist, in practice, de facto, we have a commander-in-chief, and he's the person who makes the foreign policy. And in our current world, that's the way it needs to be. We can't have our president be strapped by Congress. Congress can't agree on...
Then we might not have gotten involved in 2 20-year-long wars that resulted in countless suffering and
the Senate kicks off anything. The Senate and Congress is extremely indecisive, and they would get nothing done. We need a leader to be able to act freely and quickly on the world stage, in my opinion. I think also I'm very hawkish. I think most of these wars are justified. I don't want to get involved with Ukraine because I want to be focused on the Chinese, though. So that's why I would justify a lot of these wars. Not the war crimes, though. There is some leniency in times of war, and I understand things get crazy, but as war crimes is a completely different thing. And we do prosecute Americans who commit war crimes.
Yeah, and I never said we didn't, and I never said that we shouldn't. If someone commits a war crime, they should absolutely be prosecuted, and I think we just plain don't see eye to eye on the powers of the presidency, the executive branch, and whether we should have been involved in any of these disasters.
It feels like people do overlook the war, because I was joking originally about the Russians. I do feel like Ukraine's getting a little bit more extra scrutiny on their obvious military propaganda than Russia does. We like to talk about how corrupt Ukraine is, which given it is corrupt, but the most corrupt shithole on planet Earth is actually Russia. So do you know what I'm talking about there with giving a little bit more slack to Russia than Ukraine?
I'm not as sure on that, but I would agree with you that when you're looking at that situation, I mean, I don't have a dog in that fight, frankly. And that's part of why I don't want to see the United States government get involved at all. Even if there's a country that I would say is more likely to be in the right, I wouldn't say that the United States should go defend them or fight for them.
Oh, so you think even if a country is in the right, we shouldn't assist and defend them?
It depends on whether it's a struggle. There are certain instances where it might be necessary for us to be involved.
Do you think Zelensky is heroic for defending his homeland and supposedly choosing not to leave and continuing to fight instead of surrendering?
I think, I would think that that's probably a good thing for a foreign leader to do, to stay in their country and fight if someone's invading.
Do you think we should be sending weapons to Ukraine?
No, I don't think the United States government should be involved at all, to be honest.
Okay, but then otherwise it literally just falls to Russia. Should we not let our allies abroad know that we have their back in any capacity?
Well, Ukraine isn't a part of NATO, and that's part of why they're having this entire conflict. I don't think it's the United States' responsibility to ensure that NATO or that Ukraine doesn't fall to Russia.
Sure. Are you worried that any other countries will get a hint and a wink and a nod from the U.S. withdrawing from the global world stage as much? Are you scared this might trigger other conflicts is what I'm getting?
Well, what I think is much more of a serious risk is the fact that we have spent the last 20 years involved in foreign conflicts in the Middle East, and they all ended disastrously. And what we showed other countries is that we're not serious about fighting the wars that we do want to fight in the long term because we don't get involved. I think overall, the United States, even if you want to have this more hawkish approach and say we want to be taken more seriously on the foreign stage, we want to show our enemies that we're not weak, I think to get the American people on board with that after you have just completely failed in your foreign policy in basically every major respect is going to be impossible, even if you think that we should or it would make us look good on the foreign stage. I mean, that trust has just been completely lost.
Could I ask you
and
this?
I would also say, yeah, sure.
I want to ask you this one last thing. This is what like foreign policy people say, that if we didn't stand at all with Ukraine, that China would get like a wink and a nod that we're not willing to defend Taiwan. I wanted to ask you, what do you think about that argument? And also, should we defend or supply Taiwan with weapons? Because that's the next step. That's the next Ukraine. That's the next conflict.
I think that's a really good question. So part of the reason Ukraine has been such a disaster, in my estimation, is that our White House and Joe Biden, our intelligence agencies, the war machine was basically saying they believed that Russia was going to invade, and then there were no precautions taken. So I think if we had established a no-fly zone prior to them invading, that could have deterred them from invading.
That's even more hawkish than me.
Well, I'm not necessarily saying that we should do that, but I am saying...
position.
I don't think so, because I think Russia invades anyway, and then if you knock down, if NATO calls a no-fly zone, and then Russia invades, and then they shoot down a jet, that's still... World War III, and
it absolutely could be. If we're talking about Taiwan specifically, though, I'd have to look at the situation. I don't have a set position there. I do understand your concerns that if they get Taiwan, that's a big problem for us.
I looked up the best data I could possibly find on this issue. Abortion doesn't weigh particularly heavily for either party, but there's a +5 Republican percentage. So when it comes to the issue of abortion, Republicans at 28% view it as a top issue, Democrats at 23%, and independents at 25%. So Republicans do have the +5. That is to say, when all of these changes are happening with abortion, it doesn't seem like it will be the biggest motivating factor, but it will be more likely to motivate Republicans than it would Democrats.
It's interesting that climate change is up top there.
Yeah.
Did you see?
Well, for Republicans, it's 8%.
Yeah, Republicans don't care.
But it's interesting because did you see there was some data that came out from OkCupid and Tinder that if you don't care about climate change, it's a deal breaker. Wow. The ladies are not going to go out with you. As a matter of fact, they came up with this term petromasculinity.
Oh, I love it.
To describe the combination of the man who is, of course, racist, but is anti-climate, is racist, is nationalist, and is misogynist. So if you don't think that climate change is a super big issue, then you're apparently petromasculine, and this is a problem.
I care about climate change as much as Barack Obama does. I'm going to buy my beachfront property and I'm going to relax.
Yeah, I liked it because the other thing too is the data didn't say that the person that you're interested in had to be interested in taking any action on climate change or doing anything. It was just if you care about it, like if you really feel deeply about it, and make sure you bring your recycled bag to the market when you buy your foie gras or whatever else.
Does it say which direction you have to care deeply in? Because what if I care deeply about causing more climate change?
I like this. My favorite part too is that nobody ever remembers that fossil fuel actually resulted in the greatest decrease in global poverty the world has ever seen.
And free trade. Shout out to that. But yes. Love that. One last thing, because I just had it on my mind.
Sure.
I don't think it's enough to just be anti-communist domestically and anti-Islamist domestically. I do think that if we believe in these values, then we should try to export them and make sure that people aren't attacking those values worldwide. And that's why I stand so strongly with Taiwan. It's not enough to be anti-communist back home. You need to be anti-communist internationally. That's why I stand with South Korea, Japan. That's why we need to work closer with Australia and India. We really need to box the Chinese in. They are the next geopolitical threat. We do not want to live in a multipolar world where China gets to call shots on an even playing field as us. They view every part of our system as negative and bad. We want less of that Chinese communist influence here.
See, I wish people would be honest about that, because I often tell people, if you like the way I said this about Hillary Clinton, I'm like, if you like the status quo, if you like that we get our shirts made in Indonesia, if you like that it's a nickel an hour to make your shoes, you got to vote for Hillary Clinton. If you have a problem with that and war and the international policies that exploit foreign countries, you'll want a Donald Trump, because he's all about America first and wants manufacturing here, which will make things cost more money in the long run. But typically, everyone's standard of living will go up quite a bit.
I don't think it's exploiting. I think it's helping these other countries. And it's so interesting when we talk about these prices going up and how much people care. It's because hey, we'll make it domestically and then shirts will be a little bit more expensive. The Americans won't care. This is coming from the same people who constantly say, gas is up $2 more. Joe Biden's definitely going to lose the election because of this. So I feel like some people are having it both ways when they're talking about that, though. But do we care about higher prices? But if it's made American,
you're making a mistake. Donald Trump was in favor of energy independence in the United States, which was lowering gas prices.
Sure.
So you can complain about Joe Biden's failed energy policies. The United States, the reason, you know why we give $12 million to Pakistani gender studies? To maintain the strength of the petrodollar. We want to give people money and say, use it, it's valuable. That way they say, okay, I'll get something for this. Donald Trump was like, secure our borders, better trade deals, manufacturing back home. That would have made many things cheaper, would have made some things more expensive. All in all, the quality of life for everybody was going up. We were seeing businesses enacting 32-hour work weeks. We were seeing paid parental leave. These things were happening organically because the economy was booming. As Jim Cramer said, the best numbers of our lives. But some people, they like the idea of, for whatever reason, actually, I'll put it this way. I think if you actually know what the Democrats have been doing for 30 years, along with the neocons, don't get me wrong, things have changed in the past 5 years with Republicans. Not too much, but a little bit. They were exporting American wealth. They were extracting from the system, as what Dillard Radigan called it, if he was referring to the same thing. And it was resulting in American lives being worse off for it, people getting angry, and there was a backlash. So if you want to export American neoliberalism and neoconservative values, then you want to do everything you're saying, I suppose.
If neoliberal is free trade and neocon is, establish our values worldwide and not let our allies get stumped, then I'm kind of down with it.
Yeah, also, one thing too, it's on free trade that we change other countries' political structure based on what we in the United States have determined would be advantageous to us. So when we go to the Middle East and say, you know what, let's turn Afghanistan into a democracy, even though it's a completely unpragmatic goal that we could never achieve, and then we waste 20 years over there, trillions of dollars, thousands of human lives. That's what neoconservatism is. That's what its record has been. So you can talk about defending our allies, but all we have done is gotten people killed and made the situation worse over there than it needed to be.
This is a really good point, though. People don't want to live in a multipolar world where China is calling the shots, or at least putting pressure.
An equal say as us.
And people don't want that. But the challenge, I suppose, is many people don't want to see Americans being shipped off to foreign countries in what is typically viewed as conquest. Invading Iraq and Afghanistan for vague or incorrect reasons for the sake of expanding our power in these regions.
I think we need to continue to support our allies both militarily and economically, because in the zero-sum game of foreign policy, if it isn't us helping out our allies, it's them going to our enemies.
But what does that mean? What does that mean?
It means that, if we choose not to be friendly to the Philippines, and when China, acts aggressively in the South China Sea and navigates through their waters with impunity, that we need to defend the Philippines and let them know that we have their back.
Sure. Okay, we get that. I'm talking about invading Iraq and Afghanistan and firing missiles into Syria.
So, I mean, hey, if right now, let's do it into a modern day issue. Right now, if Iran is acquiring nuclear weapons, are we going to do anything about it?
Why?
If they do, should we do anything about it? Why? Why should we do something about it?
Yeah, why should we?
Because I don't think Iran, an autocratic Islamist regime who's threatened to wipe multiple of our allies off the map, should have nuclear weapons.
What do we do about it?
Well, so far it's been the JCPOA, the Iran deal, that we've been like 1 foot in and 1 foot out of. And then it's also through our proxy allies.
Actually, it was Stuxnet.
Yeah, and now we have
their centrifuges.
And now we have our proxy allies too, like Israel, who are constantly, harming Iran one way or another, but to try to prevent the development of their nuclear bomb.
To keep it to the modern issues, would I suppose you're arguing in support of the corruption in Ukraine and the missile strikes on Syria.
So it's not I hate the corruption in Ukraine, but I think Russia is the most country on planet Earth. Moreover, Vladimir Putin is a former KGB actual Soviet communist, so we shouldn't have a lot of faith in this guy. And obviously Zelensky isn't a perfect figure, but I'll tell you who's a lot further from perfect. It's Vladimir Putin, who actually poisons his political opposition and has committed war crimes in the past, and now what it looks like is continuing to do so in Ukraine.
So, like Syria, right? The U.S. has...
We kind of pulled out of there, unfortunately.
We're back. Thank you, Joe Biden.
As I understand, Russia rules the airspace, and that's part of the reason why Israel hasn't come as hard out against Russia as they could have. But
I mean, why? How did these jihadis and these rebels end up with NATO-backed weapons
in Afghanistan,
in Syria,
we supplied some of the rebel groups originally,
and the West wanted ISIS to destabilize Syria because we wanted to build a gas pipeline.
We wanted to get rid of Bashar al-Assad.
Because we wanted to build a gas pipeline.
There are a few reasons we wanted to get rid of Bashar al-Assad.
Well, the main reason is that in 2009, the CIA wanted to invade because we were trying to build a pipeline from Qatar through Syria and Turkey into Europe to offset the Gazprom gas monopoly, which goes through Ukraine. Ukraine. Subsequently, now we're involved in a conflict in that country because, well, surprise, surprise, Joe Biden, once he gets put in charge, his son happens to get a job, become a director for a gas company in Ukraine.
I think we want regime change.
All of this is tied together.
We wanted to change regime change in Syria because they were a Russian ally, and everything else comes after that. That's the core issue there.
But do you know why we wanted regime change? Because they're Russian allies?
Because
when we said we want to build a gas pipeline to offset the Russian gas monopoly with Gazprom, Bashar al-Assad told the United States, allowing you to do that would upset our ally Russia. This was reported in The Guardian back in 2012. The U.S. wanted to invade. Instead, a civil war breaks out. The rebels are given NATO-backed weapons and a truck from Detroit with some guy's phone number on it, which created a huge crisis for this guy's poor company. And it was destabilizing the entire region, was the West basically being like, Europe deserves cheap gas. Now, if you like the idea of Europe having cheaper gas because Russia is gripping them by the balls, then just be honest about it, that the U.S. is willing to destroy entire regions and create chaos in Ukraine and Syria for the sake of their allies. If you like your wealth, just admit it.
I think it's much bigger than just gas going through Syria. I think Syria has become a proxy essentially for Iran, and that's why we're fighting there. Multiple countries are fighting on multiple sides. It's one of the most complicated conflicts in the Middle East, but they're Iranian proxies, and we don't want Iranian proxies to win out in Syria next to our other allies, and we don't want Iran to continue to spread their influence. Same thing's going on in Yemen with the Houthi rebels attacking our other allies through the Saudis. The Saudis are backing.
And us having a blockade up that starved 84,000 children to death.
Sure, again, we haven't acted properly in all these cases, and there have been consequences to our actions, but I feel like if we're overlooking constantly the misdeeds of our enemies who are much greater and larger than ours, then we're really missing the point.
Have they starved 85,000 children to death?
Who? Has
our enemies? So, no, don't get me wrong, the Houthi rebels are terrible.
Our enemies have done worse, yeah, and the Houthi, they're all Islamist terrorists.
So then we should get involved and have the United States-backed blockade that has literally starved tens of thousands of children to death stand, even after Joe Biden says we're not going to be involved in this conflict anymore, because some people in that region also did bad things.
It's a zero-sum game. It either comes down to, do we want them to be in our sphere of influence, or the Iranian and Russian? And if Iranians and Russians and Chinese continue to exert their influence and expand, this is just going to come to bite us back in the ass further down the line.
Yeah, I mean,
so this all has to do with the unipolar world order that the United States currently has, and I think that's what conservatives probably should conserve. And we need to do that by continuing to assist and support our allies in the zero-sum game of geopolitics. If they're not with us, they're going to our enemies.
Well, I don't believe in child sacrifice, even in the name of supporting our allies.
Well, child sacrifice, come on.
What is tens of thousands of children dying, starving to
death?
The war is
happening
your geopolitical goals can occur.
And we're supporting one side. The conflict is happening. Right now, if we didn't support Ukraine, the conflict would still be happening, and the Russians are still going to be massacring people. So I'll tell you, the Russians have killed kids, and they've also killed
the United States is funding and backing the blockade that is starving the children. That's my point. If we weren't doing that, those children would not be starving to death.
I don't want to go in circles because we've said that several times. My question is, you said the conflict would still be happening in Ukraine. How come there was no conflict in Ukraine when Trump was president?
Oh, I mean, because Putin was scared of Trump, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think leaders were not able to predict what Trump would do. I think on the world stage, people do not respect Trump. Do not respect Biden at all. As I understand, Joe Biden just had his phone call ignored by Mohammed bin Salman, the current leader of Saudi Arabia. Yep. Trump would not have allowed that to happen. The first place that Trump visited was Saudi Arabia. If they did anything like that, Trump is freaking out on Twitter or something, or anything, and he's holding them to account. Saudi money is the most influential money in D.C. Trump would not let that stuff slide. If Trump was in office right now, I think we'd have more of our allies on a stranglehold. But I'm also conflicted because the Saudis have now become political. The Saudis chose not to pump oil to screw Biden.
I don't want to jump around too much. Think about that. Under Donald Trump, we didn't have the conflict in Ukraine. Putin was scared of him. I agree with that. I also think Donald Trump was actually he was crushing ISIS. He didn't care about Syria. He was like, get rid of ISIS, whatever. But the Democratic establishment, the neocons and the neolibs were like, let ISIS destabilize Assad's regime, and then, we can come and pick up the pieces or leave him in rubble as we build. Under Trump, our border was more secure, our economy was way better, and there was less war.
Would you consider Trump a neocon?
No.
It's interesting because his chief of staff, I forgot exactly who it was, but he's been called the neocon. John Bolton, who was a neocon.
By a bunch of really awful people.
Well, he wasn't surrounded by, he appointed.
Yes, absolutely.
And then he also was a big proponent of NATO. Again, he sounded anti-NATO, but what he was really saying was everybody should increase their budget to like the percent of GDP that they should have.
They should be paying the United States so that we don't foot the bill.
He was a close supporter of Japan for the purposes of Taiwan, stood very strong with Israel. So again, this could be neoconish, though.
It's not. That's all. It's America First populism. And he
standing with NATO, Israel, and Japan is America First populism.
Under Trump, we wouldn't expect someone who's an America First populist to walk in and be like, as of today, there's no NATO anymore. He went to them and said, why are we paying your bills? All these people want to come out and brag about Europe's got all this healthcare, and it's like, how much do we cover how many troops do we have in Germany? 30,000, some ridiculous number. Is it 30?
I think it's more.
Some ridiculous number. We're footing the bills for that. Trump comes and says, you got to pay us if you want this service, because he was focused on America first.
I think that might be the cost of the unipolar world, though, and if that's the cost to pay.
The cost of?
Being the world's sole superpower. That's why we have 8 aircraft carriers, and other countries only have 1.
We have like 20. He got Europeans to pay. Yeah. He got them to pay their dues to NATO.
Power.
And I'd argue that he was a neocon because of things like that, increasing military funding and also sending more support to our...
He was anti-war.
He's anti-war through strength, and that's what I consider neocons to be.
He got people to pay their bills.
He increased the military funding, and he also supported our allies militarily more, and I'd consider that.
And the neocons and the neolibs wanted to invade in the Middle East. They liked ISIS destabilizing the region. Instead, Trump had no new wars. He, under his administration, got the Abraham Accords, unprecedented peace in the Middle East. There was no conflict with Ukraine. The region was starting to stabilize. The economy of the United States was substantially better than it had ever been, but the dude just couldn't shut up to save his own president, his own second term.
He couldn't save those 2 Senate seats in Georgia either, and had to give back the Senate to Joe Biden, which I feel like is an overlooked sin that Donald Trump committed. Again, this was at the time with a lot of the election fraud stuff was just bubbling up.
Yeah, he convinced people not to vote. I can't believe how remarkably stupid that was.
Yeah, and now his campaigning right now around the country to continue supporting candidates who will only say that the election was stolen. And if you back off that a little bit, like Mo Brooks did, he'll rescind the endorsement too. So.
Well, the conservatives shouldn't keep focusing on Trump as the main guy. I think it's
DeSantis.
I think DeSantis is great. I would totally throw support behind DeSantis. I think he's been doing great things in Florida, and I think that his leadership for the rest of the country would be incredibly effective. Parents all across the state of Florida support him. His anti-grooming bill, as his press secretary coined it, is wildly popular across the country with parents as well.
It is, but it's not even an anti-grooming bill. It's just like a minor restriction on some grades.
I mean, what it says is that teachers in grades K through 12 cannot broach topics. Yeah, K through 3, exactly. Cannot broach topics of sexual
provide classroom
orientation
on gender identity and orientation.
It says that they can't bring it up.
It says they can't have classroom instruction, not that they can't bring it up. They're allowed to bring it up.
They're allowed to discuss it.
Teachers are allowed to go to children in certain circumstances that are 4 or 5 years old and talk to them all about orientation and identity. They can't. The bill specifically says classroom instruction, which is a very specific way of talking about how you go about the class, like how you go about teaching. Because they could say, I'm not instructing the kids on anything. I simply told them about what me and my boyfriend do. And that's allowed. And if a child goes to a teacher and says, I have questions about something, the teacher is still allowed to talk to him about it. So the bill is, for many conservatives, a half measure, but the left has framed it so dramatically as Don't Say Gay that many conservatives are treating it like it actually does something that they would like, when in reality it's like, oh yeah, some grades won't have curriculum, but the teachers can still talk about it.
Well, anyway, parents are in favor of it across the country, and I think that it does
keeping secrets.
And it does say that if children ask about things, that they should tell their parents.
Well, it doesn't. It doesn't say that. It says they can't tell the students not. Teachers can't tell students to withhold information, but they don't need to tell the kids to talk to their parents.
No, but it says that they will talk. It says that the teachers are supposed to tell the parents
about mental, physical, mental, medical, or physical issues.
Right.
But if a child goes to the teacher and says, "What's trans mean?" the teacher can say whatever they want and tell no one. So it's not this bill it's not an anti-grooming bill.
As I understand critical race theory, a core tenet of critical race theory is talking about like lived experiences. And although that evidence might show otherwise, that your lived experiences are more valuable than anything else. And what I was trying to get at here is that I had a gay teacher once. It was in 5th grade. As I remember, he was a nice teacher. He used to give out candy and everything. 10 years later, it came out and it was like found that he was actually a sexual predator and touching kids. And that's my whole story. Critical race theory, lived experiences. That's the only thing I have to contribute to the anti-grooming bill.
Thanks for checking out this segment from the Timcast IRL podcast. But if you want to check out the full show live, tune in Monday through Friday at 8 p.m. And if you want more special access content, head over to timcast.com and become a member. Your membership helps sustain this company, keep our journalists employed, makes this show happen, and you will get access to exclusive members-only segments of the Timcast IRL podcast, and there's a massive library to check out. So again, go to timcast.com or tune in Monday through Friday at 8 p.m., and we'll see you all there.